The person who responds to offensive speech with physical attack has surrendered their moral agency to the speaker, becoming reactive rather than responsive. Welcome back to Druid Grove, my truest travelers. I'm Druid Dave, and this week we're going to be talking about forgiveness. Considering everything that's been going on in our world, politically, religiously, and culturally, I thought it would be a good idea to discuss the concept of forgiveness. And before I get started reading this story, I just want to ask you 3 questions. And I want you to think about these questions as I read the tale of Branwen, the Celtic goddess of forgiveness, empathy, and wisdom. First question is, what do you currently like about your community? The second question is, what would you like to see more of in your community? Something positive, life-affirming, dealing with human flourishing. And third is, what do you like about other communities? Specifically communities that you've been taught not to get along with, or communities that you just don't get along with in general. What's something that you actually enjoy and admire and respect about a specific community or even several different communities? So instead of scapegoating those communities, you can come up with something positive that you like about those communities. And as well, instead of self-loathing your own community or your own heritage, you can come up with something that you like about your community and also something that you would like to see more of in your community. It can be something new, a new concept. It can also be something from the past, such as a tradition that you would like to resurrect. So let me go ahead and just read the story. This week I'm just going to go through the story. I'm not going to have any separate chapters or anything like that. We're just going to read through it. There's a lot of Irish names that I'm going to try and pronounce to the best of my abilities. I know I'm not going to have the right accent, but here we go. I'm just going to start from the top. So here we go. Branwen, the goddess who died of a broken heart. Lessons for our divided world. Introduction. The sacred marriage that became a wound. In the misty realm of ancient Wales, where the veil between the divine and mortal realms grew thin, lived a goddess whose beauty was matched only by her capacity for love. Branwen, the daughter of Llyr, sister to Bron the Blessed, the giant king who ruled over all the island of the mighty, embodied the highest ideals of Celtic civilization. She was loved by her people for her gentleness, compassion, and beauty, representing the hope that love could transcend all boundaries. Her very name, meaning blessed raven in Old Welsh, carried profound symbolism. Ravens were important to the Celts, seen as symbols of the cycles of life and death, and wisdom. But Branwen would become something more, a white raven, a creature of impossible purity navigating the dark currents of human nature. When Matholwch, king of Ireland, came to Charliekirk, seeing her hand in marriage, it seemed like a union blessed by the gods themselves. The marriage was also a political union, as Bron hoped the son of his sister, Branwen, would one day rule both islands. Matholwch and Branwen fell in love during their first meeting, and the beautiful maiden was happy with the arranged marriage. Here was love serving diplomacy. 2 hearts united to heal the ancient wounds between neighboring peoples. But the Celtic understanding of reality included a crucial truth. Where there is light, shadow inevitably follows. Part 1. The Poison of Pride and Tribalism. The wedding celebration should have been a triumph of unity over division. Instead, it became a stage for humanity's oldest destructive impulse, the fear of the other. Evnisian, Branwen's half-brother, embodied the dark mirror of love, jealousy, resentment, and tribal hatred. When he discovered that his sister had been given in marriage without his explicit consent, his wounded pride transformed into vengeance. In a moment that would echo through generations, Evnisian mutilated Matholwch's horses, sacred symbols of power and dignity in Celtic culture. This wasn't merely property damage, but a calculated humiliation designed to wound Irish honor at its core. The act revealed how quickly love can be poisoned by those who cannot bear to see boundaries dissolved between us and them. This moment of destructive pride stands in stark contrast to teachings that would emerge centuries later in another corner of the ancient world. When Jesus taught, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also." He was offering humanity a radical alternative to Evanesian's path, where Celtic honor culture demanded retaliation for insult. Christ's teaching suggested that breaking cycles of vengeance required someone to absorb the blow without returning it. The tragedy was compounded when Matholwch, seeking to restore his damaged honor, accepted Branwen's generous compensation. The gift included the Cauldron of Rebirth, one of the 13 treasures of Britain, which could restore life to the dead, though they would return mute, unable to speak of what they had seen beyond the veil. This supernatural offering should have sealed the peace, but seeds of distrust had already been planted. Here we see the limitation of material compensation for spiritual wounds. Branwen's generous gifts addressed the external damage, but could not heal the deeper injury to trust and dignity. Jesus would later teach a more radical approach. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." This wasn't forgiveness dependent on adequate compensation, but forgiveness as a conscious choice to break the chain of retribution before it could begin. Part 2. The Scapegoat of Nations. When the royal couple returned to Ireland, the poison of Evanesian's act began to spread. Matholwch banishes Branwen to work in the kitchens. Branwen is treated cruelly by her husband Matholwch as punishment for Evanesian's mutilation of the horses, though not before she gives birth to an heir, Gwern. Here we witness one of humanity's most persistent patterns. When trust breaks down between groups, the innocent become scapegoats for the collective resentment. And we see that a lot these days, such as with moral collective guilt. Branwen, who had done nothing but love faithfully and bear a child who represented the future unity of two peoples, found herself transformed from queen to kitchen servant. Her husband's love turned to cruelty, not because of anything she had done, but because she represented the other, that his people now viewed with suspicion and fear. In her suffering, Branwen embodied what Jesus would later describe as the fundamental injustice of this world, the innocent bearing the sins of others. When Christ taught, "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," he was acknowledging the same truth that Branwen's story reveals, that those who seek to bridge divides often pay the heaviest price for humanity's failure to overcome tribal hatred. Yet even in her degradation, Branwen demonstrated the sovereignty of the human spirit. Branwen's story teaches us that we have the power to remain sovereign within ourselves no matter what may be going on around us, and by listening to our inner needs and using it to set change into motion. She did not accept her suffering as inevitable or deserved, much like how Jesus, even while being crucified, continued to forgive and teach compassion. Part 3. The Starling's Message: Communication Across Division. In perhaps the most beautiful and symbolic aspect of her story, Branwen tames a starling to warn her brother, Bron the Blessed, of the terrible injustices she was suffering from. In the meantime, what she did was rear a starling bird on the edge of her kneading trough, She taught it speech and described her brother to the bird. This act reveals the goddess's profound understanding of communication as a tool for healing and justice. The starling represents something remarkable in our current age of digital connection, yet spiritual isolation. Branwen didn't simply send a message of complaint or demand for rescue. She carefully taught the bird to speak, to carry not just information but understanding across the waters that separated her from those who loved her. In our modern world of social media, echo chambers and polarized discourse, Branwen's patient teaching of the starling offers a different model. Communication that seeks to bridge rather than divide. When the starling reached Bran with news of his sister's suffering, it catalyzed not just rescue but reflection. The message forced the Welsh to confront how their actions, specifically Evanisian's destructive impulse, had created suffering for the innocent. This is the first teaching Branwen offers our modern world. True communication requires us to acknowledge our role in creating the problems we seek to solve. Part 4. The War That Nobody Won. Bran's response to his sister's plight reveals both the nobility and the tragedy of the Celtic heroic ideal. As a giant king who could wade across the Irish Sea with his fleet following behind, Bran embodied the protective masculine principle. His love for his sister demanded action, but the action he chose, invasion, would ultimately destroy everything he sought to protect. Vengeance is revealed as a downward spiral of pain and suffering. The war between Wales and Ireland becomes a perfect metaphor for how conflicts escalate beyond all reason or hope of resolution. Bran's forces, despite their supernatural advantages, could not restore what had been broken. Violence, even in service of justice, creates new wounds that demand new vengeance. Here we see the fundamental choice that faces every person, every society when confronted with injustice. The path of retaliation or the path of radical love. Jesus taught, "You have heard that it was said, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person." This wasn't passive acceptance of injustice, but recognition that violence begets violence, creating endless cycles of suffering. Bran's noble intentions, protecting his innocent sister, led to the destruction of both nations. His love was real, but his method ensured that love would be buried under mountains of corpses. Christ's alternative path suggests that true protection comes not through superior force, but through the courage to absorb evil without multiplying it. The climactic battle centered around the cauldron of rebirth itself, the very gift that was meant to seal peace between the nations. The Irish used it to restore their fallen warriors, creating an army of the living dead who fought without the capacity to speak of what they had learned in death. This haunting image speaks to our modern condition. How often do we resurrect old grievances, old hatreds, old divisions, bringing them back to fight again and again, mute to any wisdom they might have gained from their previous deaths? In our contemporary world, we witness this same pattern when people respond to words they find offensive with physical violence. They become like the mute warriors from the cauldron of rebirth, animated by old anger but unable to speak wisdom, fighting battles that only create more battles. The teaching of Christ offers an alternative. Love your enemies and pay for those who persecute you. Or love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, recognizing that breaking cycles of violence requires someone to choose love even when hatred seems justified. Part 5. The Child Who Represented Hope. At the heart of this expanding tragedy stood young Gwern, Branwen's son, who represented the future that everyone claimed to be fighting for. In one of the most heart-wrenching moments in all of Celtic literature, Evanisian, the same half-brother whose pride had started the entire conflict, threw the innocent child into the fire during a brief attempt at reconciliation. This act reveals the ultimate destructiveness of tribalistic thinking. When we define ourselves primarily in opposition to others, even the bridges between us, the children who carry both bloodlines, the marriages that cross boundaries, the friendships that transcend difference, become threats to our rigid identities. Evanician could not bear the existence of a child who was both Welsh and Irish, who embodied the unity that his wounded psyche rejected. The murder of Gwern represents the moment when conflict becomes total, when the future itself is sacrificed to preserve the bitter purity of the present division. In our current political climate, where compromise is often seen as betrayal and those who seek middle ground are attacked by both sides, Gwern's fate serves as a warning about what we lose when we prioritize ideological purity over human connection. Part 6. The Death of Love Itself. And in the end it was she, great goddess of love, not any of the men, who died of a broken heart at the destruction surrounding her. She made the ultimate sacrifice, dying to the old so that the new life could be born again. When Branwen returned to Wales after witnessing the complete destruction that her marriage had ultimately caused, she faced a truth too painful for her loving heart to bear. Branwen returned to Wales, but her heart was broken from the loss and suffering she had endured. She died not from physical wounds, but from the weight of witnessing how love, her love, had been twisted into justification for such vast destruction. Her death by broken heart represents the ultimate cost of division, the destruction of love itself. But Branwen's death was not meaningless. In Celtic understanding, the goddess who dies of grief becomes the seed of new wisdom. Branwen, Celtic goddess of love and beauty, speaks to me about the power of love to unite and the patience needed to endure suffering while holding on to light. Her sacrifice becomes a teaching about the price of hatred and the possibility of redemption. Part 7. Teachings for Our Divided Age. The destructiveness of othering. From the myths of Welsh mythology, Celtic goddess Branwen provides important wisdom for our modern world. Themes of the destructiveness caused by viewing those different from us with distrust and fear are found in her story. In our current era of rising nationalism, xenophobia, and political polarization, Branwen's story offers a mirror to our own destructive patterns. When we define ourselves primarily in opposition to others, when our identity depends on maintaining rigid boundaries between us and them, we create the conditions for Evanician's destructive jealousy. Every bridge becomes a threat. Every marriage across difference becomes a betrayal. Every child who embodies multiple identities becomes a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be celebrated. Part 8. The Spiral of Vengeance. Modern political discourse often resembles the escalating conflict between Wales and Ireland. Each side's response to perceived injustice creates new grievances that justify further retaliation. Social media amplifies these cycles, allowing us to resurrect dead conflicts like warriors from the cauldron of rebirth, bringing back old hurts to fight again and again, mute to any wisdom they might have gained. We see this pattern when people respond to speech they find offensive with physical violence, believing that words justify physical retaliation. This mirrors Evanician's destructive response to feeling excluded, wounded pride transforming into actions that hurt the innocent. When someone uses violence to silence speech, they become Evanician, unable to tolerate the existence of viewpoints that challenge their sense of order and control. Jesus taught a radically different approach. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. This wasn't about passive submission, but about refusing to let another person's actions determine your moral choices. When we respond to offensive words with violence, we allow the speaker to dictate our behavior, making us slaves to their provocations. Branwen's story reveals the ultimate futility of this approach. Neither side truly wins when vengeance becomes the organizing principle of the interaction. The Irish lose their king and their future heir, while the Welsh lose almost all their warriors and their beloved sister. The only victor is destruction itself. Similarly, when we escalate verbal conflicts into physical ones, everyone loses. The person attacked, the attacker who faces consequences, and society that becomes more polarized and less capable of peaceful discourse. Part 9. The power of patient communication. In contrast to the violent response of the men in her story, Branwen's approach offers a different model. Her careful teaching of the starling represents communication that seeks understanding rather than victory. She doesn't simply send demands or accusations across the water. She creates a messenger capable of carrying complex truth with empathy and precision. This model challenges our contemporary addiction to reactive communication. Instead of immediately responding to perceived slights with counterattacks, Branwen's approach suggests the value of patient, careful communication designed to build bridges rather than burn them. Part 10. The sovereignty of compassion. Call on Branwen when you can't see the forest for the trees, and she will help restore your vision to one of wholeness. Call on Branwen when you are challenged and lacking in empathy, and she will help you feel love again. Even in her suffering, Branwen maintains what we might call the sovereignty of compassion, the ability to see beyond immediate circumstances to the larger patterns of human need and connection. This inner sovereignty becomes crucial in our current political climate, where we're constantly invited to reduce complex realities to simple tribal loyalties. Branwen's example suggests that true strength lies not in the hardening of our hearts against the other, but in maintaining our capacity for empathy, even when that empathy brings pain. Part 11. The modern lesson. Love as a revolutionary act. In a world increasingly divided by nationalism, racism, religious fundamentalism, and political extremism, Branwen's story offers both warning and hope. Her marriage to Matholwch represents the radical possibility that love can transcend the boundaries that seem to separate us. Her death represents the real cost when we allow fear and pride to poison that love. But her legacy lives on in a crucial teaching that echoes across both Celtic and Christian wisdom traditions. In times of division, maintaining the capacity for love becomes a revolutionary act. Not naive love that ignores real injustice or genuine differences, but mature love that recognizes our fundamental interconnectedness even in the midst of conflict. This wisdom becomes especially relevant when we witness people responding to disagreeable speech with physical violence. Both Branwen's story and Jesus' teachings reveal the same truth. When we allow others' words to provoke us into violence, we become prisoners of their provocations. The person who responds to offensive speech with physical attack has surrendered their moral agency to the speaker, becoming reactive rather than responsive. Jesus modeled a different way when facing his accusers and executioners. Even under extreme provocation, false accusations, physical torture, and execution, he chose forgiveness over retaliation, understanding over condemnation. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing, represents the ultimate example of maintaining spiritual sovereignty in the face of injustice. Bronwen's broken heart becomes a call to our hearts, to feel deeply the cost of our divisions, to grieve for what we lose when we choose hatred over understanding, and to commit ourselves to the patient work of building bridges, even when those bridges make us vulnerable to those who profit from division. Christ's example shows us that this vulnerability isn't weakness but strength. The strength to break cycles of violence by refusing to participate in them. Her starling still flies across the waters that separate us, carrying messages of hope to those who have ears to hear. In our age of instant communication but failing connection, we might ask ourselves, what would Branwen teach her starling to say to a world that has forgotten how to listen to each other with love? And how would Jesus respond to those who would silence such messages with violence? What would Jesus do? The answer lies in both traditions. With patient love, radical forgiveness, and the understanding that our true enemies are not other people, but the cycles of hatred and retribution that imprison us all. And remember, light only shines while facing the dark, and the peak of being is simply being. Till next week, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I hope your family's doing well. You know, I think with everything that's going on lately, if you're feeling somewhat depressed or somewhat down, it might be a good idea just to shut your phone off. Get outside, of course, touch some grass, go on a walk in the park, go up in the mountains. If you live around any mountains, go to the beach, go to a lake, go to a pond, go to a creek, go to a river. Simply get out in nature. That's the Druid way. The true way to heal is, in my opinion, movement in nature, getting out in nature and moving through nature. Allow Mother Earth to heal you. You can rewrite your trauma. We can move on. We can find unity. And we can embody and imbibe the energies and dimensions of faith and forgiveness. You can dwell on the teachings of Jesus. You can reflect on the teachings of the goddess Branwen. Until next time, everybody. Peace out.